So, what are we
Okay.
here for? What are we going to do? Where are you going to take us? It's your
So
show.
great. Basically, I am about to start writing the next episode of my Wonderland series, which is
Yes.
about sex and gender,
Hmm.
which I've been wanting to kind of think and research and talk about for a very long time, since like 2016 or something. It's always been discourse I've been kind of ambiently aware of and interested in. Um, and so my idea with this episode is that because I'm kind of like skeptical how much meaningful information you can derive from social science inquiry, especially how easy it is to like bias research and stuff like that. I wanted to make the like majority, the bulk of my research for this episode be talking to queer people themselves and doing kind of long form interviews where I ask them about their experiences and their perspectives, and try to kind of talk to as many different people I can with different points of view and use that as the basis of kind of, yeah, the research for the episode.
So, what I got from that is that you think I'm queer.
No, so some of those people that I've reached out to, obviously, given the nature of your channel, have been people that have also you've spoken with in the past as well at some point. So like I spoke to April, I spoke to Richie, I spoke to Elle, and I spoke to Phil,
Hmm.
and along with I guess 9 other people that are like more personal friends. Um, and so I've been like watching a lot of your videos kind of as like, or your previous interviews as preparation for when I was going to speak with one of them, just because I don't want to be asking a bunch of redundant things. Even though like I've generated a list of around like 50-ish questions that I'm asking to everyone to kind of
Oh, wow.
get the same shape of, or like rather try to see like where people's experiences line up versus where they differ and where they sit on the rainbow and stuff like that. Um, but I just wanted to do some like background research. So I was watching your interviews with them. And then I figured it would kind of be interesting. I've been speaking to some cis people also because I think that's an equally important aspect of the conversation. Like, what does my very normie, non-online, non-politicized friend, what does she casually think about these issues, given that she's like in very liberal circles and
Yeah.
is never really at the forefront of her mind necessarily. And same thing with like just some like male conservative friends that I have that are equally like, whatever, I don't want to think about this. I think those perspectives are also weirdly important because if you're just focusing on queer people, then that's also biasing the picture. Um, so I thought it'd be
Hmm.
cool to talk to you because you've been doing these conversations for such a long time and you've spoken to like hundreds of different queer people and transitioners and detransitioners and stuff like that. So I thought you would be an interesting resource in terms of having lots of generalized knowledge on the subject, maybe. And it also kind of seemed interesting to me that I don't think no one's ever flipped the script on you before and asked for your perspectives and your experiences on this topic.
Every once in a while I go off, but generally, yeah, I'm a passive conductor of stories from one source to another. But language, it's curious that you use the terms queer people and cis people. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do those terms mean, and why do you adopt that language? Because that is a particular framework that's already you've already established a framework, which I need to
Yeah.
inquire so I understand like what that means for you.
I guess I like to me queer is just the catch-all term for like anyone who falls into the LGBTQI plus category under that rainbow
Oh,
umbrella. To me, queer seems like a pretty generalized, accepted term. So you could just be bisexual or something, and that would be enough to call you queer.
okay.
And then yeah, I don't know if I'd like directly contrast that with cis, but I guess I mean like cis het, like just your normal average. If you're not doing any of the queerness, then you're by default a cis het, I guess. So that
Okay.
would be the inverse.
Okay.
Not that I love that language, but like it has the job, and we all know what I'm referring to when I say
Yeah.
that. You know.
But when it comes to gender and sexuality, there's a split between the normal and the irregular, the not normal, than the
Mm-hmm.
queer.
Mm-hmm.
And what constitutes the category of normal?
I would say that's like if you um are born non-intersex. Let's start with you're born either male or female. So you don't have like an innate kind of sexed deviance or irregularity, you could say. And then you're attracted to people of the opposite sex and you don't kind of have any experience of dysphoria playing your gender or sex role in society.
Okay. How does, this is kind of Socratic, but I need to understand where you're coming from. How does being attracted to the opposite sex make one normal? Like on what basis does that normality reside?
On the basis of like, I think reproduction in terms of like functional utility. That's why we have this sexual dimorphism to begin with. And so I think you're kind of right in pointing out that like I think it's very normal for women to have a sexuality that's like slightly more fluid than men. So maybe like your average normal woman is like mostly attracted to men, but like can kind of see herself like maybe she's a Kinsey 1 or a 2. So maybe that bisexuality thing is like a little bit loose, just because you can. I think there's different degrees of like sexual flexibility when you compare men and women. And I think even if women is our woman is like slightly attracted to other women or could do that, that's still kind of in that 80-20 cluster of, I guess that's why I'm zooming out. It's like, well, if 80% of the population is acting this sort of way over time, that's the normal bundle. And then the 20% is doing something different.
Okay. Yeah. So normal sex has to do with using sex or participating in sexual interactions that are in accordance with the purpose of the sexual organs. But
Yeah.
that doesn't
And sorry.
encapsulate, reproduction doesn't encapsulate the totality of sexuality or normal sexuality.
Yeah. And I say normal without any like value judgment there. Normal is in like standard or like, expected, you could say. But yeah, it's not a bad thing to be deviant in the slightest.
You brought up the word queer, and queer has a political term or a political aspect of it, which is to intentionally destabilize and disrupt any sort of hegemonic or normal or regular meaning. So queer is a political project, e.g. queer theory.
I guess I don't think, when I think of the term queer, I don't think of it as having necessarily externalized political consequences affixed to it. I mean, I don't know the etymology of the term, but when I'm using it, I just mean it to refer to like anyone under the rainbow umbrella.
Yeah. And just to push back, the rainbow umbrella, it does, like, after you get past B, it's already no longer homosexual. Trans doesn't necessarily mean homosexual. Queer can mean, if I decided to wear a ponytail and dye my hair pink and identify as queer, and I and I use they, them pronouns, I'm queer. Like, it has nothing to do, it's all fashion, it's all politics. There's no inherent sexual deviancy or sexuality involved in this. It's pure fashion. And then I get to go to the pride parades and I get to go along and just have kind of, it's a social category. It's no longer a sexual category. And then transgender is a different category than lesbian, gay, and bisexual. Transgender has to do with one's perceived notion of their own identity or how they wish to be perceived with their identity. You can be gay and nobody knows you're gay. There's a flamboyant gay stereotype or archetype maybe where, this people will act as though they're gay and you can gaydar, really easily. And then there's other more subtle forms of homosexuality, but homosexuality in and of itself doesn't have a character signifier to it, but queer does. Queer as a term that is used where you see these like male lesbians who do nothing to transition at all other than maybe wear pink or something, going on these female dating apps, calling themselves a lesbian and, hunting for that which they wish to have, which is a heterosexual relationship, dressed up in the finery of a homosexual weirdness stuff. So that whole rainbow thing, there's so many different it's queered itself in that the categories themselves you can't line them up and straighten them out, because LGB is different than T, which is different than two-spirit, and queer and plus. Intersex has nothing to do with any of that stuff. It has nothing to do with sexuality. It's about sex, as in, biological sex. So most intersex people don't even want to be associated with this weirdness stuff. It's purely biological, it's purely material, and it's purely a medical issue that they have. Transgender is kind of half medical, half psychological, and then half social, and personality, half. So that's the lay of the land for me when we talk about the difference between the cis hets and then the rainbow coalition.
So I guess like what catch-all language then do you think is preferable to kind of get that the group that the LGBTQI plus is invoking, even if there's maybe differences in terms of what they're about or what their needs are. It just in that they represent some deviance from the norm, shall we say. And that can be measured many different ways. And then even to your point of like, there's some of the, like there's always contentions around how much do you want to have queer crossover into the land of also encompassing kink or paraphilias and stuff like that.
Oh.
Because what you're describing before of the like the more autogynephilic aspects of identities, it's kind of a foot in both.
If I have a thing for my close female friend, to have her wear a certain article of clothing, like there's just a certain article of clothing that's very important for me to have her wear. Does that put me in the rainbow group?
No, I don't think so.
Because I have some form of thing that is approaching kink or fetish. Does that put me in the group? Like,
No.
does certain activities that are not, well, I don't want to, it can get pretty, I'm trying to think of like, kind of like safe kind of things to bring up, but things that deviate from the norm of sexual copulation, which I think is aimed at copulation. And then on top of that, or through that, or with that is aimed towards sustaining and developing intimacy, deep intimacy with your other partner. So within the category of, going to get rid of the cis part, but within the category of monogamous heterosexual, there's the activity of being close and being in synchronicity with somebody, using our bodies to celebrate each other, to worship each other, to maintain each other, and to love each other. Like there's this process of love that's going on. So beyond the cis, I would get rid of the cis. I would put mono hetero. Like that would be the standard, or not even like normal, but that's the standard on which the most stable civilizations rest is
what is the mono? Oh, monogamous. Okay.
Monogamous, yeah. Mono, but we're already so far away from that in our culture that it could be the case that the rainbow flag or the rainbow coalition began with the deviation not from heterosexuality but from monogamy.
Yeah, because there's the question too, like could you like, and I don't have answers here. If you could argue that poly people should be under the queer umbrella or something, like you can start getting really creative.
They
but
like
it
that.
all depends on what your baseline expectations are, going back to that, like should a bisexual woman constitute queer, or when it's like, well, to what extent is that kind of something to be expected or not? Or somebody like Ayla would probably argue, well, most people are right, and we're going to be like monogamy is this artificially constructed thing, and polyamory is the default. So you can, like, I think it's it really easily gets lost in terms of different people's interpretations of like what constitutes normal, right?
Yeah, and cultural expectations and cultural influences. And I'm sure, I don't have any research on this at hand, but I'm sure that homosexuality and heterosexuality are to a certain extent influenced by cultural expectations. Especially if you pump your schools full of gay propaganda, you're probably going to have like more and more people identifying as gay, which is what we've been seeing over the past 5 years in colleges.
Yeah. The society can definitely influence people's identities more so than I think progressives want to lend credence to.
Well, so there's this really interesting relationship between this thing that we call identity and then this thing called gender and sexuality, right? Gender, I think, is more closely related to identity than sexuality is. But because there is, let's just say, positively, there is expectations. There have been cultural expectations for certain sexual behaviors, standards, norms, mores around sexuality. That creates the category of the outsider, or the people who participate in sexualities that's beyond the norm. So probably the largest category of that would be lesbians and gays. Bisexuals I don't understand the bisexual thing. It's just kind of like not having a preference, or just being horny all the time and not caring. But I don't know. Like, how do you have a bisexual monogamous relationship, like a long-term bisexual relationship? The other person only has one sexuality, so you're either gonna live a gay life or a straight life when you settle down. And
Yeah, I think the idea is just supposed to be about who you could be attracted to or see yourself falling in love with, right?
so bisexuality is a potential. It's not, unless you
Well,
just have constant sexual interactions.
I feel like it's so long as you've felt the capacity to either, if you've loved both men and women, or if you've slept with both men and women, then like that to me seems you've actualized both of those potentials, right?
Yeah. And if it's assumed that you will continue to participate in multiple sexual activities with multiple sexual partners, then bisexuality is a viable term. But if you take that off the table, I don't think that it means anything. Like, because you could.
So, because you could be with your husband or wife, but watching a movie. And if you're bisexual, then you're going to be both watching a movie being like, oh, he's hot, she's hot. Like, it's just your capacity to be attracted to somebody. Okay. I don't think it's about your future.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Sexual relations.
Okay. Interesting. Well put. So sexuality having to do with arousal or desire, not necessarily towards the other aspect of sexuality, which I brought up, which I need to bring up, like, which is missing from the conversation. What is the norm of sexuality? There's a cultural norm, and which culture, and you can look through history at different formulas that different cultures have aspired to or instituted. Polyamory, polygamy, very rare, it's polyandry, where a woman has more than one male, and it's very, very rare. And it only happens, if I recall correctly, in circumstances where resources are very, very limited, and usually the woman is sharing brothers. So the gametes, or like the evolution game, or the sexual selection game, is working out in the favor of the men, because they're both passing on their genes, and they're both putting resources, their work, into their own offspring. But I think and then there's monogamy, and then I guess monogamy can be heterosexual or homosexual, but because homosexuals don't reproduce, like they can't be the cornerstone of a civilization unless you have technology. I guess so. In the natural environment, in a natural historical environment, there's either going to be one man with one woman, one man with many women, one woman with many men, or many men and many women getting together. But who raises the children in that context?
Collectively, it would seem.
Maybe, but there's always going to be grifters. That's the problem. Like, you're just giving this kid over to whom, and who has actual attachment to them, who actually goes the distance with this person. There's going to require a lot of selflessness from more than one person, or a little bit of selflessness from a bunch of people, to get that child the resources that they need, and then to grow them up, which it just seems really messy to me. Maybe Ayla's kind of right, but I think it's right in a way. Like, Ayla's, if she did say the statement that polyamory is the natural state of life, and monogamy is the exception, or the cultural construct, but polyamory I don't think can scale. It's too messy. You can't really have organized societies. You're going to be, I don't think it can scale. I don't see how it can scale. I think it's just too messy to really develop deep relationships with the child, with the mother and the father. Those relationships are psychologically empowering. I'm sure that You know people who come from so-called broken homes and people who come from so-called stable homes. And the more stable home probably has deeper long-term relationships with the mother and the father, at least one, or maybe a mother and a mother and father. But like when you look at somebody who's pretty stable from the get-go, they usually have been treated well by a mother and a father or have really deep relationships with them. But I might be wrong
Mhm.
about that. I'm kind of just riffing.
Um, yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's kind of you can get lost. The question of what is normal and how much of this is nature versus nurture is kind of like an endless conversation point, right?
Yeah, yeah. But
Um,
if sexuality is purposed towards reproduction and intimacy, then it changes the landscape of what we want from sexuality. But if it's not purposed towards intimacy, it's purposed towards, let's just say, pleasure. If all sexuality is for pleasure and it has no direct tie to reproduction or to intimacy, long-term intimacy, then it could be anything it wants. Sexuality we have tons of sexual energy, and we're human beings, so we can hack a lot of different things. But the question is, what is the purpose of this? What do we want the purpose to be? And then looking empirically, how is it best organized? How is it best repressed and allowed to be expressed? That's where it starts to make sense, this whole conversation about gender, sexuality, etc. But without that, it's a huge morass of mess. And then you have a lot of people, like what my research is, if you can call it research, is about watching these people who are damaged
mhm.
struggle with their gender, struggle with their identity, struggle with their sexuality, and then try to figure out what is the anchor for my sexuality, for my gender. And it inevitably, with the detransitioners, it's inevitably that my sexuality, my gender, my identity isn't just about me. It's about developing a strong, lasting relationship with somebody else. It's about serving someone else. So my gender is about plugging into the world in a way where people can kind of read me in a way, and I can kind of read other people in a way that the friction of working with strangers is lessened because we have like this basic stereotypical pattern of male and female. But the sexual act, the sexual organs are about connection. The penis is about connecting to the vagina. The breasts are about connecting the mother to the baby. They're not about looking in a certain way or being a certain way. It's about actually connecting with another human being. And when we start to mess around with those, what's acting out, I think a lot of the time, is somebody's desire to not connect, or damage in their ability to connect, or having been damaged by a wrong connection, such as sexual abuse or emotional abuse. Inevitably, it's a manifestation of that. Now, probably are certain people whose gender dysphoria is such, it's baked in and it has something to do other than sexuality, other than abuse and stuff. Those are very rare. They are kind of the exception in this day and age to what transgender means. Transgender means it's a body modification cult, largely speaking, about projecting one's identity or desired identity onto the world, and it inevitably has to do with just a disorder of development of understanding what sexuality is for. But because our society won't put any expectations on sexuality, anything goes. You can do whatever you want. There's no inherent meaning to the sexual act. And then you have a bunch of people who don't have any, or are completely lost with regards to what this thing is all about. And then they fall through the cracks. And then a lot of other, last point, a lot of other mental disorders by the medical industry, a lot of these mental disorders, a lot of abuse, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, cluster B personality disorders, autism spectrum disorder. All those things are now being put under the bag of this thing called gender. And then these kids or these young adults are being put through this system that grinds them up, because and it doesn't actually help them with all these other issues with them. It gives them this kind of like this simulacra of the body that they think that they want, rather than actually dealing with their actual problems, which I think
Yeah,
a lot has to do with connection to other people.
yeah, that makes sense. Um, so my plan for this was to run you through the same questions, the interview questions I've been giving to everyone else, if that sounds kind of interesting
Yeah,
and
let's do
fun.
it. Popcorn.
Um, Awesome. The first half are kind of more personal about you, and the second half is more like your takes on general discourse.
Okay.
And so if you want to skip any questions, just that's fine. But
Oh, okay.
it will be somewhat targeted towards you. Is it okay if I record this on my computer also?
Absolutely. Should be
I think I
doing
can
it
record
all.
it twice over.
ABR. Always be recording.
Oh, there's some permission request sent to
Oh, yeah.
host. Interesting. Um,
Boom,
yeah, I've been doing
and
these,
boom.
then I listen back, then I write notes, and then it's been really fun putting all of the answers kind of in contrast with one another and
Hmm.
seeing where people seem to sync up and where they differ. So the first set of questions is just called calibration questions. Oh, um, how old are you, Ben?
I'm 47, Jane.
Okay, well, this person I've spoken to. And how do you self-identify?
As a content creator
Nice.
and
And
interviewer,
okay? What's your sex?
male.
What's your sexual orientation?
Um, Leslie Elliott.
I don't know who that is.
Yeah, she's in the next room.
I see. Okay, monogamy. Mm, just straight, just women.
Yeah. Well,
Would you think
but woman,
singular?
women's a stretch. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Would you say you're more submissive or dominant in bed?
I am attentive. Um, so probably dominant, but I would have to take qualms with that. I was actually thinking about this the other day since we're talking about this subject about like the dominant and submissive thing is it's a very low it's you can be read as a very low like who's in control, who's leading the dance, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
actually the dominant if you're a good dominant person, you're actually being very attentive to the signals and the to your partner, and then the partner is allowed by you holding space for them to flower in various ways. But being dominant isn't about controlling; it's actually about attending, submitting oneself to the other person, and lifting them up and
Mm-hmm.
supporting them. Yeah,
That's a good point. But in both those things, it's like who is the object of attention, you could say, who's adopting like the more
yeah,
masculine or feminized role.
yeah,
Um, you know the like yin and yang.
yeah. Those little
Um,
spermy things.
did you ever read Sexual Personae?
Oh man. This is going to be a really crude interview. I started reading the audiobook, but it felt like getting like a mythological blowjob, so I had to turn it off. It was just way too. This is Camille Paglia's book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just so intense. It was wonderful, but
Mm.
just like so sexually intense that I couldn't listen to it without
How far into would you say you got?
getting. Probably about an hour in or so.
Oh, okay. So maybe you got to the part I asked because she introduces the concepts, the dialectic as Apollonian and Dionysian, but I think she does that in
Mm.
the first chapter. So I don't know if you got that far in. This question is basically like archetypally, would you say you'd identify more with yin or yang? So yang being the white, the kind of left brain, structural, mathematic, logical, like shooting an arrow sort of thing, masculine coded, or yin, the chaotic, black, feminine, emotional, earthy, intuitive, artistic.
What what's the what's the question?
Of
Do I
those two,
identify or do I
yeah,
feel as
which
though
do you identify more with more?
more and more I'm unifying them. I am 47, so I'm kind of in a different stage of I think development where my yang is kind of chilling out and my yin is uh, filling in the gaps. So I'm achieving more and more balance as I age between those
Yeah,
two.
I definitely think like everyone has like both forces within them, and you should strive to have be able to hold both of them. But like most
Yeah.
people, especially in relative to others, you'll find like am I the more structured and orderly relative to society, or am I the more chaotic and emotional, like that sort of thing.
That's really hard to it's really hard to say. I try to I feel that it's important for me to be the yang in society or a marker of the yang, a good yang in
Mm-hmm.
society, by which I mean that my responsibility to my kin and my clan and my tribe and my country has to do with me ordering, being the structured one, putting out order, or signaling order and trying to order things when I come across them.
Okay, next section. This is like kind of personal, but
It's
most of them
kind of
aren't.
personal. Oh, it's
Well,
gonna get kind of personal. Oh, already. Okay. I thought
well,
we were there, but okay.
most of these ones, it's like I took out most of them because it's like for queer people,
No, you
more
get,
so.
ask
So
me
the
the
straight
queer
ones, there's
people
not a lot.
question. Okay, whatever. All
Well,
right.
they wouldn't make any sense. But for you, I can ask, why do you think dysphoria happens?
Dysphoria is that's an individual, that's a case by case individual question.
Mm-hmm.
When I was doing research for this, or when I was embarking on this series on gender, sexuality, and transition, and going through the discourse and watching the discourse unfold, and thinking about gender, and thinking, and then like waking up in the morning and asking, do I feel like a man? Do I feel like a woman? And it's not a material question for me. It doesn't really make sense, but I do remember I do remember moments when I'd act more feminine and kind of feel like, would my dad like it if I act like that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
In a way. And then I look at my social relationships, my formative years in my teens. I had mostly girlfriends, and I was able to be like a man surrounded by women without triggering the sexual intrigue. I could just fit in with a group of women and kind of be the odd man out, but also be accepted into their women's spaces because I didn't threaten them or excite them either. Or so I was able to blend in or to withhold my certain masculine aspects of me, which would trigger their feminine aspects of me. So I think that gender is a form of communication between the sexes. So dysphoria could have to do. Sometimes dysphoria has to do with a very, very feminine gay male, or even just a feminine male who's straight, which tends to be more autogynephilia. There has to do something with a sexual aspect to them wanting to be feminine, or the sexuality of a man who's straight is directed at femininity, and if he starts to embody femininity, there's kind of this short circuit that can happen where like this, and it's similar to pornography or masturbation, where you're not using your sexuality, you're not directing your sexuality into someone else, you're using something else to short circuit your sexuality so you can maximize that circuit, kind of like you're taking the cocoa leaves and turning it into cocaine, the cocoa leaves being natural sexuality, and then like distilling it into sexuality. So when a man in an autogynephilic way concentrates his own femininity into an object of desire, it can be very, very intense. And you can see one example of it a few years ago. There was the It's Ma'am event at GameStop, where this very male man got mad for being called a he or sir, and he got really, really defensive and aggressively defensive about his femininity. So it makes more sense that his femininity is his wife, and some guy just called her a bitch, and he's protecting his femininity, like his own femininity. That It's Ma'am dude, chick with a dick or whatever, or dude with the tit, whatever it is. The object of his desire is still functions as a wife or as a mate or as a resource that he then is protecting and defending, kind of like on an animal level, like very aggressive, don't mess with this kind of thing. But it's weird because there's some sort of, they call it erotic target error. That's one way of thinking about AGP, is like we have a erotic target. A male would have a female if he's heterosexual, but somehow the error is back inside of himself. You should talk to Phil Illy if you haven't.
I did,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
That was the last person I spoke with.
So that can lead to dysphoria, which is like I really, really, really love myself as a woman. That's a form of dysphoria. There's I don't make sense in the world. I as a man I get beat up a lot. Speaking of a very effeminate gay man, and so there's a social aspect. I can just blend in and be safe,
Mm-hmm.
or I can blend in and get into the women's spaces, or there's something wrong with my body. Every time I look at my body, there's something wrong with my body. Like there shouldn't be a penis there. I shouldn't have masculine features. And I think that a lot of that has to do with, there could be some sort of developmental disorder, but I'm sure that most people who feel that way have been sexually abused, and they're trying to escape the sight of the abuse, which is their body or being objectified before they were ready, as a male or as a female. And a lot of the ROGD, or rapid onset or teenage onset female transgender identity, a lot of that has to do with not being ready, not being given the tools to deal with male attention, being disgusted by male attention, not knowing how to, wanting to flee from male attention, flee from being objectified. But there also is other aspects of that, and because transition or gender has become a cultural currency, it completely disrupts the entire explanation of this, because it's also cool to be trans. It's also hip to be they. College girls, when I was going to college, used to have a bi phase. Now they have an I'm a guy phase. It's just this phase that they're like, oh, I'm cool, I'm a guy, or I'm bi, So there's a fashion aspect of it that hits women more than men, but then men are following along with that because that's how they will get laid, or get a mate, is by following the females into this they themness, but it's a total morass. So gender dysphoria there's a lot of personal, it's case by case, but also there's a cultural cachet to it, which completely obscures, like fog of war style, what we're talking about now.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find the concept of having an internal gender identity to be a useful one?
Why I call myself gender positive, like there's this movement called gender critical movement, which is related to radical feminism, which perceives of gender as mostly a series of cultural expectations that control or suppress women. But also, I think they are critical of gender because they don't think that it exists, or it's a cultural construct and it's not reality. There's only sex. That doesn't make sense to me, or that way of looking at gender is not rich at all. It's just saying, don't talk about this thing called gender. But if you look at the gender critical movement, you'll have groups of women and groups of men, or men relating with, it's mostly women, but women are acting like women and they have certain expectations for themselves. And there's a lot of infighting and there's a lot of positionality. So their gender expression is working out sociologically, like it always does, like it always has been, with female kind of typical aggression and female bonding relationships and the way that it just acts. And so you can see the gender acting inside the gender critical community. And if you say there's no such thing as gender, you're just saying, I can't analyze the social aspect of sexual, mental and social relationships. I need to examine that. I think the best way to think of gender is that it's really easy. You can think of sex as hard-coded, and you can also think of gender as hard-coded. So if you are in a field and a half a mile there's a woods, and you see somebody emerge from those woods, you probably are going to notice first the dimensions of their body, and then what they're wearing, and then their sex. You're going to see their sex really quick. We are hard-coded to see sex really quick. And there's all these different reasons why. If you, and that would be sex. With gender, if you began to tell a story, or you were going to write a story, and you used the word he, it was a third-person story, and you started talking about he, or you started talking about she, you would have a different feeling about the character that you're writing, just on that basic level. And then their personality would emerge through that he or she-ness. Now, on a high level of abstract, or a higher level of literary prowess, you can start to switch genders, like Orlando, right? What was the book by Virginia Woolf?
Yeah.
or different sorts of like commentary, social commentary, but you're going to basically have a different set of feelings about the reality, or making a believable female character, which is the holy grail of male writers, right? That is a gender. Or
Mhm.
Achilles, if you read the Iliad, Achilles is a fucking man. He's just a fucking man. Like every guy in there is just fucking men. And it's all happening. It's a story. It's a perfectly virtual artifact that is exciting neurons in your brain, that's connecting with your cultural expectations, your physical experience, and then you're also your biological, your emotions and stuff. And you are going to understand that these are men acting like men, or like men turned up to 11. Similarly, I think the paragon of a female literary or gender archetype would be, and I always mispronounce the name, Jane Eyre,
Mhm.
by was it Bronte? What's her name?
Yeah.
Is it Bronte? Yeah.
I don't know. I think so.
That book is the emergence of, it's finally like that period of English literature where we have the novel, and the novel also happened around the same time in either Japan or China, where you have this female emergence into literature, and it could only happen, the complexities of the female genotype, or the female not genotype, like there's got to be a word for like the psyche or the archetype of the feminine, emerges into literature when you have the technology that has enough words to support it. Like the novel as a
Mm.
form is so wordy and internal and going over and mulling over things. That's when you actually have the full expression of the female in
Interesting.
literature. It can't be condensed. You can kind of condense it, like where, if you go back to like something like a romantic, you can have images of the feminine, but you don't have like the emergence of the feminine psyche until you have the printing press that can like really, and that's a gendered thing. That's
That's really funny.
the women I know, the women you know, probably you as a woman, you kind of notice that you kind of talk a lot, you think a lot, women tend to be
It's a more
very
rich
verbal.
inner world. Yeah.
It's a very rich inner world.
Whereas
So
the Greeks can
that's,
be like, this guy went and did XYZ and then he went to bed and like, that's it. There's no.
yeah, and he it's all action. He stabbed
Mhm.
the guy, and here's his name, and this is the thing, and he argued with this other guy, and like it's very action, like, and you don't have a lot
Mhm.
of internality. You have a lot of expression, like, oh, I'm sad, I didn't get my way, but you don't have that really rich internality. And Jane Eyre is just the perfect example of like the emergence of the female psyche. I forgot the question. I hope I answered it.
Yeah. I asked if the concept of an internal gender identity is useful.
So to finish that, identity is too rigid a form. It's a poor level of analysis. It's a narrowing of a very rich experience. Identity, having a gendered identity, is to rope yourself to a series of symbols that you'll need to swap out again, because your gender identity has to do with or actions, your interactions with other people, and to what degree you need to be conscious of those has to do with your development. Like, we're all self-conscious of
Mhm.
being a girl or being a boy, and we get over it. If you're still like thinking about your gender identity, there's something wrong with you. You need to get over that. You need to let that go, and you need to just kind of very intuitively plug into a woman or plug into a man. And then also like understand that there's a lot of dynamics going on and propriety and all this other stuff. But if you have a gender identity, it's like carrying around this image of yourself, and you make an idol of it, which means that you stick yourself in time. You're not open to experience, and you can't grow beyond it. So I think it's best for you not to have a gender identity as some sort of static thing, but as a set of tools and languages to interact and to form connections with other people.
Yeah, its gender is like a good heuristic, but you shouldn't mistake the map for the territory when it comes
Yeah.
to living your life that way. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, did you show early signs of gender nonconformity as a kid?
I cross-dressed in seventh grade.
Uh-huh.
My church girlfriends, my youth group girlfriends, for like, we had a party one night, like it was a big church party, and for some reason we decided to dress me up. We thought it would be hilarious. So like I dressed up. It was very I know that in Britain before this whole gender madness, like there would be like these different kind of clown shows or carnivals where the man would dress up as a woman, and there's this something inherently silly and funny and and breaking through. One, it's kind of it's mocking the masculinity, and it's also mocking femininity. There's also drag, which is another thing that happens within the gay circles, you know, where they allow themselves to express their femininity, and produce it and really lean into that. But for me as a heterosexual boy of like, what was I, 14 or something, like 13, 14, it was just to play around with that. I think that there are, when you ask about gender conformity, then we start to bring up stereotypes. To what degree was I a jock or a nerd? Like there's different ways for a man to express his masculinity, and some is harder and some is softer. So softer masculinity would be kind of seen as kind of feminine or effeminate or effete, like not wanting to get dirty, kind of being a pussy, so called. And that, I'm using that term very specifically, as just the way that men kind of toughen each other up. Not saying that the female genitals are inherently derogatory. They're not. They're wonderful, and we all come from them, and we need to respect that. But I would say that I was more artistic, poetic, really in touch with my femininity, but my femininity was a way for me to understand females, understand women. It wasn't a identity in itself. It was just a proclivity to understand certain aspects of life that women are generally more capable at, or tend to be more invested in. Language, arts, aesthetics, cooking, tastes, sensuality, and maximizing that rather than maximizing my strength. Like I was never into like sports. Like they always just bored the hell out of me. But I could sit down and try to make a group of women laugh, you know, like that would be my exercise, like being the class clown, which is a way of which is a stereotypical male thing, but it's not a jock thing. Like the class clown will probably be like more of a male, probably. The jock will probably be more of a male. The nerd will probably be more of a male. Though you have nerdy girls, you have like, you have sporty girls, and then you have spicy spice girls, right? So we all kind of, it kind of breaks down, but I kind of gave you a sense of like, what
You're
might
a soft boy.
I wasn't necessarily soft. I just kept away. I was kind of a loner kind of guy too. So like when we start to use gender in that sense, it's like, okay, well, what's your it's like, it's almost like we're trying to do a personality type, but we haven't quite nailed it down into like these different letters on this board of hexagrammal, you know, questionnaire kind of stuff, like that Enneagram thing, whatever, like that.
Yeah. The reason I generated this question is because like often early signs of gender nonconformity in children will be used as evidence to like transition them later on. But then it's one of those questions where it's like, well, actually, if you ask any gay man, he'll say the same thing as like a trans woman would. Or actually, lots of straight men too will be like, yeah, but of course, I also wanted to try on my big sister's nail polish when I was 4. But like, that's again, it's not really indicative of anything other than being curious what nail polish is like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or having your girlfriends dress you up, or like it makes sense, especially to the fact that like, because in humans, women are the adorned. It makes sense to me that every man would have a natural curiosity of like, well, what's it like to wear a skirt or a dress or makeup or have long hair? Because a girl can cut her hair short and wear jeans and go drive a truck and no one's going to blink at it. So there's an asymmetry in terms of what role avenues are available to you.
Yeah. It's interesting. I still think a man in a dress is ridiculous, but that's my cultural.
Have you ever worn one though, Ben? Maybe
I've worn them, but it's still like, it's just silly. It's funny. It's fun.
It's not flattering. The dresses are designed for a woman's body for a reason.
Yeah.
Do you feel pressure to live up to conventional gender norms or perform certain roles?
Yeah. I don't feel any discomfort for that. But yeah, like I'm the man of the house right now. I'm in a relationship, and there's 2 kids here, and they're both boys. and I have a certain strength in my voice. Oh, okay. I can talk about my past. I worked in a preschool for a very long time, for about 15 years on
Mm.
and off. And I only worked with one man during that time, but I did work in co-op. So dads would show up, but I was mostly a guy with children and women for a really long time. And I noticed that I had certain capabilities or proclivities that the children liked, and listened to. I could use my voice in a way to target them, to get them to stop doing something right away, like hurting somebody, just by using my voice, or get them through the process of, we're speaking of 1.5-year-olds, washing their hands before taking a snack. With washing their hands before taking a snack, there's certain number of steps. You get in line, you get some soap, you rub your hands, and then you get a towel, right? And I watched my female coworkers do all this talking through the whole thing, and the kid would be distracted and going all, and I just like, soap, water, towel, soap, water, towel, soap, water, towel, like that. And I noticed that that was just a masculine, my gendered expectations or my power as a man got us through this really efficiently thing. And then we go through all this thing. And then what I ended up doing would be sitting down. This is an interesting thing. I'd end up, we'd get it all set up. We'd get all the lunches out. We'd get everything down. And then it would just be talking time, because we're just eating and talking and telling people not to scream or play with their food, but like we're just hanging out now. And after working in the toddler room for a while, that drove me crazy. Like just sitting down and talking, like I have no desire to just talk about nothing. So I brought in a guitar and I started to write children's songs. Like I tried to play around with guitar, like in a way that the kids would like using that same kind of thing where I got their attention, trying to replicate that in the in song or with nursery rhyme. Try to create that nursery rhyme that would exist on its own in a playground, like ABCs or like any of these songs, that like trying to get like a song that just like sticks in the head and lives beyond me. Like that would be another way that I think would be kind of more associated with my sex or my gender. Like I didn't want to sit
Definitely.
around talking. I had to do something. I had to
Uh-huh.
be invested in something because I'm spun artistically. That's how, and I'm spun linguistically. That's how I exerted that and got value out of it, or made myself feel like a man, like I'm not just wasting my life being a toddler teacher. Like I actually produced 200 kid songs or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's very true. That makes a lot of sense that like your presence as the only man in that environment would actually confer a lot of direct benefit because I'm sure you're right. There's something about hearing a male voice cutting across a room that kids are going to turn their heads and like listen a little bit more quickly than if it's the maternal figure because it's kind of more
Yeah,
malleable almost like you've got more leeway
yeah.
there.
I one way I articulated it was that I'm a catapult, not a cushion. So the women, like if a kid got hurt, they would
Nice.
hug the
Yeah,
kid.
yeah, yeah. I
I
love
would be the
that.
one throwing the kid around, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would not, I was always hesitant to be sympathetic to the child's pain because I felt like if I concentrated on the pain, I would magnify the pain if they scraped their knee. But if I
Yeah.
concentrated on them, and let them concentrate on the pain, then I would magnify them. Like my attention in and of itself, and I noticed this a lot, that children thrive, consciousness, the food of consciousness is attention. So how I paid
Mm-hmm.
attention to the kids, and because I noticed it as a man, there's something based on my sex or my gender, whatever it is, where my attention on a thing magnifies and concentrates the thing. So I have to be very careful how I pay attention to things. And I could be very beneficial or very detrimental. I can make a kid feel really bad about themselves. I
Mm-hmm.
remember I was changing a kid's diaper and he was getting to be about 3.5. And I was really tired of changing his diaper. And I kept on trying, you just don't do this. And one time he made a huge mess and I looked at him and like, I felt bad because I sent him this signal, like this is disgusting, right? And he felt like I could see him like feel shame, and I'm like I have to be really careful how I attend to this kid. But after that, he kind of breached himself. He saw himself in his filth, and he's like, oh, I. So my attention actually allowed him to see himself in a way. So there's good and bad aspects to how we do that. But I noticed that my attention is more concentrated, whereas the women that I worked with, their attention is more diffuse and more like they would come in and out of each other. There's this thing that that women tend to do in their teenage years, where they kind of glom onto each other. Enmeshment, it's called, and that's why you have social contagions affect women mostly, because they're always enmeshed and they co-ruminate a lot. Their psyches are like just get really entwined with each other.
I wonder what that says about me, that I definitely did not have that, like a female social cohort in high school or
No,
afterwards.
were
No,
you a loner?
big time.
Huh. And you don't feel that you're missing out on something, or you don't feel like the need to have somebody reflecting your emotions back on you, or your psyche back on you?
I mean, like, I think obviously I think everyone wants to have like a little group of friends and gal pals that you can get together with, but also that fantasy versus what reality, like that's not always necessarily feasible. And I feel like if I tend to derive a lot of enjoyment and on by being by myself, then like you
Yeah.
really have to be getting a lot of any social dynamic that you're inserting yourself into. And I just don't feel like I necessarily relate to that feminine um, cohort so much when it comes to feeling the need to, like, have someone go to the washroom with me or something like that. But that
Yeah.
can be a
Okay.
locus of bonding for a lot of women also. But
Yeah.
I feel like I'm pretty male brained in my approach.
Did you have hard time understanding the vicissitudes of female interaction? Or did you just not care for it, right? So people who are described as Asperger's or autistic spectrum females, like they don't really understand like all these very subtle signals that women send each other. So
I think
there's
it's a bit of
not
both.
understanding it or not caring about it.
I think there's a bit of both. I feel like there's I think those ideas can cross over in the sense that, like, well, if I don't understand it, then it's hard to care. Or maybe I
Hmm.
do understand it, but I think it's stupid, and ergo I
Yeah.
don't care.
Okay. Yeah.
So a bit of both for sure.
Huh.
Okay, the next section is all discourse questions, but I think I'm going to use a washroom before we do that. If that's
Okay.
cool.
Let's take a 5.
Yeah, give me 2 seconds. I'll
All right.
just mute. Lovely. Okay. So this section, I've been basically saying to everyone, I don't want to hear like the conventional, generic, mainstream, socially appropriate answer. I want to hear like
Well, you
in
come to the
your
wrong place because I'm just a talking point generator.
talking points are great. I just want like the most kind of whatever like don't feel obliged to just like regurgitate whatever the normal thing is. I want
Okay.
your spiciest edge takes. Like I've been
Okay.
pitching this section to people, like if you were a supreme dictator, benevolent
Yeah.
gender dictator of your own gender
Five.
utopia,
Yeah.
yeah, how would you want these issues to be conceptualized
Okay.
or addressed? Not
We're
not
world building here.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't
Sandboxing. This is
matter
what you like
what's
to
in your
do.
life. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly,
Yeah. All
exactly.
right,
You
cool.
know me. What is a woman?
Queen of Heaven.
Hmm.
A woman is the parapet, the scaffolding upon which the civilizations of man are erected and reset. Women are a vibe. Woman is a vibe, but woman is also the like if you're talking about a daughter, the woman is the man's daughter is his what he finds most beautiful in life. It's the expression of his of his deep subconscious relationship with life's beauty. So woman is beautiful. Woman is like women hold beauty. Women hold life. There's so many. I can't really answer this, so I could keep on going, but I'm just going to be playing like tarot cards until we start to arrange them into more complex social order.
I think that's workable. That's a good start. Um, what does it mean to be trans?
Absent technology, nothing. With technology, it's having transitioned certain characteristics. Secondary sex characteristics are either diminished or heightened through the use of hormones, but you can't actually be, there's no such thing as a trans endocrine system. So you can only inject these hormones and hope for the best with them. So there's no trans endocrine system. When we talk about the genital surgery, there's no such thing as a trans dick. Like, there's flesh that's taken from one part of the body and stuck on another part of your body, or you are castrated in terms of a male and your penis is inverted, or parts of your colon or stomach are used to create a simulacra of vagina, but the vagina doesn't serve a purpose other than aesthetic. So trans is an aesthetic. Trans can be in the case of what might be called true trans, which I'm skeptical that there's such thing as true trans. But there is somebody whose distress at plugging into the world is alleviated by managing or manipulating their characteristics, their sex characteristics. And that would be the closest to the benign sort of trans, but absent technology, it doesn't exist. That's really a harsh answer, but
that's interesting. So like absent, I get what so if you were to pretend that Mulan is dressing up as a man, not out of obligation to fight for her country, but because it's granting her gender euphoria, that's not a sufficient example of like historical, not that that's a real person, but you get my point.
Yeah. You would have transvestitism or transvestitism, like, so a man dressing up or wanting to present as a woman could be a social role. So that's not transsexual. So I guess we have to open up. Are we talking transsexual, transgender, or transvestite? Transgender is a relatively new concept that we are now, or certain people are undertaking the project of recasting all of history in that. But there are women who get along better in society behaving and appearing as though they're a man. And there are men who get along better in society by doing the opposite, or men who achieve some form of enjoyment or harmony with themselves, or sexual fulfillment or gratification, which I think that sexuality and internal harmony are very closely linked. I don't moralize sexuality. I think that there's deviations that cause more problems or less problems for people, but a man who achieves some sort of internal sense of harmony, peace, or gratification through dressing up in private or walking about town is not transsexual or transgender. It's transvestite, which is just the vestiges of the other sex. So trans doesn't exist without the binary. Trans doesn't exist without a deep-coded social and biological concept and reality of male and female. So it actually, in a certain form or in a certain way, trans reveals the reality rather than demolishes the reality of the sex binary.
It's the exception that proves the rule, is how I like to think of it.
Yeah.
Should people always use preferred pronouns?
I will extend the courtesy for under certain circumstances for preferred pronouns, but the more I think and meditate on this, the more it feels like I'm participating in not necessarily a lie, but a betrayal of the truth. So when in terms of being polite, I will try to just use the person's first name over and over and over again instead of the she in the case of a male or he in the case of a female, because there's something about there's a for me, and this is my own bias and my own way of looking at things. There's a spiritual reality. There's a deep spiritual reality that is there is a manifestation, a sacred and profound manifestation of reality through sex, and not just the act of sex, but also the male and the female. The male and the female are expressions of God's love or of being's fulfillment of itself. So to play around with that or to disregard that outside of the bounds of politeness, it feels like slandering the origin and the outcome of existence to me. I'm sorry, but like sex is how we got here. Sex is how we continue to be here. Sex is therefore a gateway to being. And sex only happens between a male and a female. So I think, this is really hard. This is hard code. This is hardcore, Benjamin. But that's when I look at it and express it like this is foundational. This is absolutely foundational. So I try not to betray that. But in the case of being polite, I'll wiggle.
I see. So even in the case of a
Waffle.
trans person who's like, who passes perfectly well and maybe they have a lot of that essence of which that they're transitioning towards, you still feel like there's you don't want to completely overlook the biological realities.
In the case of Blair White, and I
Specifically Blair, of course, is like the North Star when you're trying to talk about like the fishiest trans. It's so funny.
and yeah, in the case of Blair White, and she's been kind enough to come on my channel a couple of times. So I feel like she very much respected me. So I very much want to respect her. But at the same time, the her is not the reality. The her is a secondary modal interaction that she has with the world. It's not a primary. I don't know why I use the term modal. It's just a secondary aspect of her reality. So her is convenient, but it's not real. So it's kind of like, it's still tentative,
Because you're saying the identity is still being defined in relation to the sex. So it's like you can't, overlook the
I didn't watch the video, but
relationship.
she didn't want to get her willy cut off. So she still has a willy.
Mm-hmm.
So even she, and this is the problem with the whole conversation. I'm totally mangling reality right now, but Blair understands either like the complications of getting rid of that or that there's something that's essentially Blair about that part of her body, that most masculine part of her body. And also Blair is influencer. So Blair lives and exists and travels in circles or in a climate that very much prizes appearance, very much prizes appearance. So when we talk about Blair and we talk about she, I think I'm talking about like this construct rather than the reality, because she lives in a constructed world like LA and the internet. It's very constructed. So she is projected. It's like if we're playing a play, like, and like we're all on a play. My character as Benjamin Boyce is really close to my character offline. But it's also like an image that I'm projecting. I'm still playing a character in a play. So there's different rules within the play than there is necessarily in reality. It's still kind of like not a farce, but a simulacra. It's the Matrix kind of thing. So you can be a female or really close to being a female in the game, but the game is still a human construct that's made out of human belief and human attention, not necessarily made out of God's power and nature, right? It's not necessarily, it's using nature to facilitate itself through desire and through objects and stuff like that. But it's a different thing. I'm having a hard time like feeling like I'm making perfect sense because like this
You
is
are.
interesting. I haven't totally hammered out all my thoughts on that.
Okay, good. It's nice to have a platform where I'm gonna put some pressure on.
Yeah.
So basically, if should people always use preferred pronouns? No, not at all. Oh, you will
I
do
don't
it out
think
of
they should be
respect, but
required to. Yeah,
yeah.
I would not I would not institute a society where people must use personal preferred pronouns. No. No.
Hmm.
Strike that one
Um,
from the law books.
all right, all right. Is passing important?
Passing, I mean, if you do it less than once a day, you're going to be uncomfortable. Some people have
Hmm.
problems with this, so there's different, herbal remedies or different like changes in diet that you can use to pass. But it's kind of important for dietary and even emotional health to have a daily constitutional at least.
And interpersonally.
Interpersonally, I poop alone. I don't know about you. So I don't know about that. And then I always try to
No,
like use a match afterwards to kind of clear up the air, like so you
yeah,
don't like leave
gross.
like the, yeah. Well, no, it's gross. So, you have a fan there, it's like it's very personal business. But what do you mean by passing? Like, what does that really mean?
In terms of obviously the trans notion of the term, being perceived
Huh.
as the gender that you identify as.
I live in Washington State, and Washington State is weird. And I noticed that actually before trans went popular, it was already kind of popping up. Like there's something about this area where people and sex and gender like it's like kind of morphing. There's a lot of morphing, and I think it's because there's so many mushrooms here, and there's so much like plant force, like just makes you want to go. And so there's just these these gendered people that I see, like clearly a woman with a beard, clearly a man with tits. Not just like I have tits because I like tits. So it's like they're not even. It's not even important for them to pass. Like they're actually like breaking through the barrier of what you expect, and it's kind of weird. It's odd, and plus it's transhuman. So
Mhm.
when we go from transsexual or transgender to transhuman, what is it going to mean to pass? Like, am I going to pass as a dragon or a humanoid dragon? Like when you look at the transhuman, or do I pass as a cyborg? Is it important that nobody knows that I have a chip in my brain? So I pass as human. Is it important for AI to pass as human? What does passing actually accomplish? Like people don't think twice about you? Is that important that people don't think twice about you? Is it important that you stand out? Well, that has to do with your ego. Do you want to stand out? Do you need to stand out? What does sex mean when you stand out as a woman? When do you like that? When you not like? You probably don't want to stand out as a woman on a dark, seedy street, but you wouldn't mind standing out as a woman in a very elegant ballroom, right?
Mhm.
Like you like standing out as a woman among women, that probably feels really good. You standing out as a target of well, I mean, I guess both of those times you're kind of a target for attention, but like there's certain times where you want to pass as not a woman, right? So it's really like, is it important to pass? It really, really like that is a just a very basic human just social thing. It doesn't really have to have sex. And in the case of transsexualism, depends on what the person wants. It would be nice if people passed if that's what they want to be, so they don't stand out. But there's a lot of women who don't look like women. There's a lot of men who are like, whoa, you don't pass at all. Like you're barely even human. You're just like scraggling along, right? Do you want to pass in certain like passing even has to do with class. Passing has to do with your accent. Do you want to pass in terms of being like thought to be smart? Like, yeah, you do. Passing is it's just the basic way that we establish the economy of culture, like of human interaction.
So it's
So is it
important
important? Yeah.
insofar as that's something that like you want to manifest reactions along that dimension.
Well, if you're not worried about how people perceive you, then there's something wrong with you. And by worried, I mean like if you're not aware of how people perceive you and you're not using that to your advantage to either disappear or to stand out in certain ways at certain times, then you're not really developed as a human being. It's just basic
Hmm.
human interaction. Like, do you pass as what? As an asshole? Yeah, like
Yeah.
I love to pass as an asshole. Like, well, that's an asshole. Like Trump, does he pass? Yeah, he passes as Trump, right? Like it's like you can't pass him by without saying, "Whoa, that's Trump." Like he passes as like this thing, right? So passing and then it just to what degree is human interaction theater, and to what degree is it just normal human interaction? I'm sorry, I'm breaking that question open, but it's so
No, no, that's fine. This is why I'm asking them because I want
yeah.
them to be going in weird tangents.
Okay.
Because I think that's where the interesting stuff lies is in the comparisons that are being drawn. And no, any answer is a good answer. um, is dysphoria a mental illness?
Is it if you can't stop thinking about your knee, are you okay? Like, is that a good thing for you to keep on thinking about your knee? When I was a teenager, I noticed that my thigh jiggled, and I was just obsessed with it. And I thought everybody could see my thigh jiggling, but it's just a piece of flesh that's going to jiggle when you walk it. Like, I was just really self-conscious about things. I have a crooked tooth, really self-conscious. Well, I was never self-conscious about that, but that made me stand out, right? Self-conscious, I drink a lot of coffee, my teeth are rather yellow. So like that was really self-conscious about that. Like, but to what degree do I hide when I smile? You know, to what degree do I change the color of my, the warmth of my camera to do that? So, dysphoria is, what does that even mean? What's do you have the etymology of that? I mean, by definition, isn't dysphoria English? Psychiatry, dysphoria from dysphoros, hard to bear. A state of unease or generalized dissatisfaction with life. Adolescents with depression, dysphoria, mania, and anxiety disorder. So, like, by definition, yes. But what does that really mean to be gender dysphoric? There's a lot of people sociologically who identify into gender dysphoria, but like they're just using gender as a way to work out other dysphoric feelings. It's just like, I just don't feel, it's like the opposite of euphoria. So I think euphoria too much, it's best to have a baseline and to go kind of through dysphoric and euphoric, vacillations like a normal human being was. But if you're always dysphoric, then of course you're going to feel euphoric when you think you solved the problem. But is gender dysphoria, so what was the original question?
Is it a mental illness?
Is gender dysphoria a mental illness?
Yeah.
Insofar as it's your mind not being well, yeah. To what degree can you talk yourself out of that? To what degree can you grow out of that? To what degree do you need hardcore medical interventions to solve that? That's a really big and very important and very prescient question right now, because the medical industry is more than happy. Planned Parenthood is more than happy to grow your beard, and then the laser guys are more than happy to take it off, right? But is that going to solve your gender or your dysphoria? And maybe it'll give you some alleviation, but does it actually take it away? I think there needs to be a lot more patience and concern and love and care for people, and they are not getting what they need. And so gender and dysphoria is a manifestation of their needs not being met in one way or another. So it's not just a mental illness. It's just like they're not thriving as a human being beyond just their mind.
Yeah.
Their mind's expressing something. They're stuck in a loop because of something else.
There are different motives for it, and some are more kind of, they can be mitigated, and maybe in other people, in other instances, it can't be, but it's like you can't generalize these things.
It's really hard, and you shouldn't. If you do that, you're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Is non-binary a trans identity?
What's non-binary?
I don't know.
Are you non-binary? Have you ever wanted to be non-binary?
I've taken those online tests before, and I get pretty high on the non-binary. As I said before, I feel like I'm pretty male-brained. So I think spiritually, practically, I definitely don't align with my sex stereotypes. But I also wouldn't make that the cornerstone of my identity.
I'm going to, give me 1 second. I'm going to share something. I'm going to send something to you in chat.
Yeah.
You see that? Yeah. Somebody made that up and it's trendy, so I don't know. It doesn't mean anything to me. Maybe it means something to somebody. It's not an actionable, it's not a sexy category, I'll tell you that much. And by sexy, I mean it's not generative. Like, what does it create? What does this thing create? What does non-binary create? It's totally narcissistic. It's the dead end. It's like the cul-de-sac of genders. It's like, oh yeah, let's go on a journey, a gender journey. Oh, well, I guess get a long chair because we're non-binary. There's nowhere else to go. Or I get to go this way or that way. No, make a choice. You have to go somewhere. To be a man and to be a woman is just a prompt for you to be a human being. It's a prompt. It's not something that you deny. If you're denying that, if you're trying to escape that, well, you're either up in your head or you're going to try to escape reality. Where's the creativity there? Where's the non-binary great work of fiction? Like the non-binary Iliad, the the great work of art, like the non-binary skyscraper. Like, no, it's a fucking dick penetrating the sky. That's why it's awesome. It's not, no, it's like, this is like the extension of the will of man, like there's no, not like, what, So I'm disappointed that the kids think that this is something cool, but it's just something cool. It's a tchotchke. It's a trendy. It doesn't have any inherent awesomeness to it. Do you see some awesomeness there?
No, personally, I
might be a
don't derive a lot of.
Okay.
I don't derive a lot of utility from the term. I think it's kind of it's funny because like I think you can kind of take maleness as like the default thing, and then you could say femininity is the thing that's like it's going to be different in whatever sense you wanted to start defining it. So then to say like, well, to step outside of that pre-existent dichotomy is like you can just end up in endless recursion without actually adding in any new information. Because it's like as soon as you have non-binary established as a third category that someone can identify into, then you can look at all three and be like, well, I don't identify with any of these three, so now I need to step out and make a fourth one that's over here somewhere, and you can keep like
then you have your 3,000 gender identities.
Yeah, but you've not actually gleaned any new information because non-binary just reinforces the stereotypes practically, I think.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, then it can't escape them. I think gender is inevitable. I think, like I said this before, and I've said this to gender critical people of the highest caliber, but if we got rid of gender tonight, we'd have to reinvent it by noon tomorrow. It's just like, gender is, even Nietzsche said, I'm afraid we can't get rid of God because we can't get away from gender. Like, it's just like, it's encoded in our language. It's a category. It's like the way that we establish human categories. Gender just means genre. It means category. There's a sex category. It's real. It influences constantly every human interaction to some degree. If we got rid of that, it would just come back in a different form tomorrow.
Yeah.
Just like
these cross-cultural patterns are emergent and consistent for a reason. It's not
unless you just want to like cull the human race and make them like unable to reproduce or to have stable relationships, then I guess you can try to like decimate that, but I don't know. I like my heritage, including the human heritage.
Yeah, I don't think our capacity for blank slateism is actually runs that deep. It's like a very Rousseauian notion that like societies.
You know what Rousseau did to all his children, right?
No.
Yeah, he just banged the maid over and over again and then threw the babies away, threw the babies to the orphanages. He didn't want to have, like, talk about being a man or not being a man.
Talk about blank slate.
Yeah, talk about blank slate, yeah.
Okay, is trans a spectrum or a binary?
There is no trans is a medical pathway to resolve a mental state of distress. Trans is culturally, trans is something that's interesting and tends to be very narcissistic and self-involved. So it's on some spectrum. I'll tell you that. Is it a binary? I don't think of it in terms of spectrum or binary.
Okay, so it's not like there's a harsh line in the sand of like this person's trans and this one's not because you can.
Are you trans or are you? That's what you mean. Are you trans or are you not? I guess there could be like some layer of you could split hairs, but like like if you. Let's say that you took just enough testosterone to give you like a little bit of a performative edge, but not to like actually meddle with your femininity, right? Like if you're a sports person or a chess player, and testosterone just really helped you do that, but you didn't take enough. So you'd be transhuman. Like you'd start to use medical technology to heighten yourself. So drugs, and if I go down that route, then me drinking coffee is like a transhuman thing. Me using all this technology is transhuman. Like I'm projecting myself into people's ears. I'm abstracting my voice and my face and I'm sending it out over the internet. So that's a form of transhumanism too.
Definitely.
I'm human, all too human, right? So transsexualism is using technology to facilitate that. So once you start to do that, then yeah, I guess you're trans. But then how is that like, how is trans a salient social constructed that? Should I change my behavior to you if you started to masculinize yourself? To what degree would my behavior change to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's the bigger question. I don't know.
Is it a binary? Do I start treating you differently as soon as you grow one like whisker?
Probably not.
Well, probably I go, oh,
Maybe.
Jane's got a whisker.
I gotta flick that, yeah.
But I'm polite, so I'd suppress that.
Okay. Is it better to have more or less people transitioning?
Is it better to have more? What would the world be like if more people transitioned? What is the effect of transition? Transition, we don't fully understand the long-term consequences of various levels of transition. The so-called bottom surgery or genital surgeries are very primitive. Mastectomies are irreversible and sad. I like boobs a lot, and to have less boobs in the world makes me sad. I don't think and then the hormones and stuff. Who pays for all these hormones? Who pays for all these surgeries? Should the National Health Service, I guess you're still in Canada, should the public, should insurance, should I be paying into my insurance so other people can transition? I would rather not. I don't think that's I think that's a cosmetic surgery. Maybe under certain circumstances it helps you one way or another, but if you're being a burden on society, how much can society sustain that? And to what degree do we need to get that estrogen to women who need it rather than to men who want it?
Well, this is what the mental illness question is for, right? Like, if that's something that you're using to judge the heuristics. Because if you're saying, well, dysphoria is a mental illness, like currently in our society, you need to say that dysphoria is mental illness because in the American healthcare model, that's how you can get access to the things you're describing.
Yeah.
So, but then practically speaking, I think people would they vary in terms of, well, how much is it actually mental illness? But like the fact that has trickle down consequences is then shaping the discourse.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's sort of the root of me wondering. Because paying for it, is kind of a separate issue that's tied to the mental illness capacity, at least in the US.
And to what degree does it affect a child's development for their father to transition in the middle, just overnight? Like, what's the cost to families? What's the cost to relationships? To what degree how much can we afford this? And what are the costs? We don't know. So I would say it's probably best to slow down and not do more.
Mm-hmm. Is the concept of social contagion something to worry about?
Worry about is something to be aware of. It's fascinating. To worry about means that it's necessarily a bad thing, but you can have good social contagions. Actually, that's what you need, is some good social contagion. We need to release some goody memes into the teenage mind to get them to act or behave in the way that I would like them to act and behave rather than the way that the global American empire, whatever it is that's manipulating all of this, or the world or Satan wants them to behave, right? So social contagion is just the way that specifically females are more inclined to that. And when we think of social contagion, we think of it in terms of a disease. And if you go through the history of social contagions, you'll see that since the Middle Ages, women have spinning fits back in the Middle Ages where they just started spinning, and they would spin and spin and spin until they'd faint, or sometimes they would die. They would keep on spinning, and it was just like women in Europe were just doing this thing.
It's interesting. Like the twirling dervishes.
Yeah.
There's like something vaguely like religious about that,
Yeah, or just trying to get drunk, or just being women tend to have teenage females tend to have a proclivity for distress, for just generalized distress feelings. They look for answers for this generalized distress feelings, and they usually find it within their cohort. Somebody like with pro-ana communities, right? The pro-anorexia communities. Like there's manifestation after manifestation after manifestation of specifically young women in mass expressing their distress through some novel means. And it just happens over and over and over again. But I'm sure it happens, and I'm sure that same phenomenon can be a beneficial thing and is a beneficial thing, but we don't necessarily think it. I guess like the Beatles were a social contagion. If you go back and you look at the videos of how the girls were just going absolutely bonkers for the Beatles, like there was something so hysterical, and by hysterical, I mean just like out of like just this incredible extreme expression of emotion. And it was euphoria. It wasn't necessarily distress, but that was but they were all doing it together, and they were all getting off on each other, getting off on these beautiful shaggy boys. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess if you wanted to design society, social contagion is something to take into account, both to protect against and then also use in your favor.
I guess I'm wondering um, if these contagious attitudes that are being adopted, not so much the Beatles, but like the pro-Ana stuff or the dysphoria, if it's not being reached for because there's some sense of distress that it's then acting as like a remedy towards, whereas in like kind of the fangirl culture is the same sort of like generalizing your mind to the mob mentality, but it's not ameliorating some sort of distress that you're experiencing in the same way that the negative stereotype social contagions are.
Well, I try to push back. It might be the case that being a fangirl like does relieve you from feelings of loneliness, feelings of purposelessness, right? It allows you to forget certain things that you don't want to, maybe you don't want to think about. I'll fan out about Axl Rose instead of doing my homework, or or like working on my relationships with boys that I know, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, like Sherlock and something like that. It's like that was a social contagion back in 2013 or whatever.
Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yeah.
He was a social contagion?
Yeah, that TV show was like so popular on Tumblr. Like I was part of those Tumblr fan communities, and it's like a TV show that has like 3 episodes, and there's like a fandom culture that's been going crazy for 2 years, and people are like and making gifs of every possible split second of the thing, and like making endless art and talking about it and writing fan fiction. It's like it's completely explosive relative to the size of the initial interest.
Yeah. I think then in that sense, social contagion is just a malignant form of fashion, maybe. Like it's a co-rumination. Fashion is a co-rumination. Trends are a co-rumination. Fascination. Yeah.
Okay. At what age should schools teach kids about queer identities?
I don't think queer identities exist. At what age should children be groomed to expend their mental resources, their emotional and sexual resources on such a thing as any type of identity? At what age should children be taught about their white identity, their black identity? Like at what age is that appropriate? And I guess it's okay to have a black identity. It's more salient in our culture, though I would argue that it's probably best that we didn't teach kids about their identity. I don't think identity is something that should be taught in schools. It should be mitigated by cultural institutions, not state institutions. Why is it more... Like, if you're good at reading and at writing and at sports, why do you need a queer identity at all? Like, what does that serve? How does a queer identity serve anything?
I think, like, having spoken to Phil the other day, he'd probably say, like, being aware of queer, deviant, paraphilic, other kind of sexual orientations and things like that. Personal things that could be going on in your psychology when you hit puberty, but you can't really make sense of. It would be helpful for kids to have exposure to some of these ideas because that could help them make sense of what they're going through.
That's a good, fair point. I wouldn't trust a generalized school curriculum with that. Maybe a psychology or a counseling profession that was not corrupt, but the one that we have is corrupt. So I don't think that should be in state curriculum or in a generalized curriculum. That's something that the kids can hash out on their own, or if it's particularly distressing, then Even that, like, what do you have? Like, you just have like this queer identity center that they go to and figure out their queer identity. What if they're just exploring? What if they got sexually abused and so they're confused, right? Like, who does that? Who's in charge of that, and who do we trust to do that? Can we, does the old fashioned, just everything that's not the norm is deviant and should be suppressed or open or ridiculed? Does that help us? Is that tenable anymore? Because in this day and age, you can just be whoever you want to be and be on the internet and find all the friends that you want. So to ridicule or to disparage somebody for that is to send them into it even further in a certain respect. So
Mm-hmm.
who is capable of loving the child best? It would be the children and maybe some sort of spiritual leader or mentor, a teacher, maybe, but who's qualified to do that? And can you scale that? Those are really big questions.
Okay. So tending towards just nothing at all because the top down system is going to be too easily biased and manipulative.
Get it out of I don't want it. I don't think that teachers should be doing that. No, I don't think that state schools should be doing that. No. But I wouldn't mind if they were doing it in a certain direction, but I do mind that they're doing it in the current direction. So if I had complete control, I would probably have conversations with, in a proper way, probably with a woman present, with small groups of teenagers about this. And I would do it in such a way that wouldn't be moralistic, but would center values of connection and the purpose of sex as a vehicle for intimacy and deep connection rather than a vehicle of self-expression or self-pleasure. So paired with the knowledge if paired with the knowledge of paraphilias, is the value of connection and reproduction, then I would have a better time with it being in a curriculum.
Okay. Um, what should determine when a person can start medically transitioning?
Oh,
You have a lot of experience in this area.
yeah. I would say it's probably best to wait until you're 26.
26.
Yeah, I think that's best to wait until I mean, and 26 to start actually medically transitioning, but be in counseling for at least 6 years. Like be in counseling on and off from the time that you hit puberty. If you have a distress about your puberty, to have a long-standing, deep, exploratory therapy going on, so you deeply understand yourself and you deeply know yourself and you're deeply at peace with yourself, as much as you can be before you utilize irreversible, intrusive medical procedures to find peace and harmony with yourself. And at 26, you have more of a perspective, especially on child, probably a better perspective on if you want to be a mother or a father, before you give that up and give that away. And there has to be a very serious vetting for comorbidities, for histories of sexual abuse, or other forms of so-called mental illness, need to be ruled out and thoroughly supported before access to cosmetic gender surgeries is available. Unless, I mean, you want just, but if it's not transgender healthcare, then it's just cosmetic healthcare. And like, I don't want people to have tattoos, but they get tattoos. Does breast augmentation or what's the opposite of augmentation? Reduction. Yeah. If insofar as that's cosmetic, should that be restrained? Well, how destructive is it to your ability to lactate and to breastfeed? That's a question that is paired with the breasts, and what do breasts symbolize? If you want to chop them off, I would not want to be the surgeon that does that. I think that you're getting a heavy karmic load of liberating people from their breasts, just without thoroughly understanding the meaning of what they are doing or what that procedure is symbolizing for them. And if it is
Mm-hmm.
if it is an expression of a broken soul, or a broken mind, or a damaged mind, then why is the breast so significant that it needs to be gotten rid of? What is it symbolizing? I just like, yeah, and I think 26 is important, especially for bottom surgery or genital surgery. That
Is
stuff is so
it,
primitive. I don't even think anybody should be doing that, but it's really
do you get
risky
the
to do
number
that.
26 because you're thinking like your prefrontal cortex is fully developed at
Yeah.
25?
Yeah, 25 is, and I just think you need a perspective of going through the process of growing into your own skin. And especially, I would actually really tighten, if I had my way, I'd really, really batten down access to gender affirmative care, so called, until it's not popular anymore.
Mm.
Until it's safe, rare, and effective, right? But insofar as it is really popular right now, or a trend, or like just is captured a lot of people's imaginations and hearts and stuff, there's a lot of people who don't need this and who will regret this, or who just don't need it, who can be fine in other ways. So I'd tighten down a lot right now if I had my way. If I had my way, I'd take 5 years to really tighten down, and then go only to no kids, and then go only to very thoroughly documented cases, like where we have a really solid data set, and then over the course of 10 years, constantly look at the data and then kind of constantly reform to allowance. But trans doesn't end with sex or gender. It's going to be humans, transhumanism. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Technology is not stopping. And our lust for Miltonian self-expression and self-glorification is not going to stop, barring some sort of financial disaster or world war.
So would you want to put other body modification procedures on that same 26 timeline then?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Like if
Okay.
I
So at least you're
wanted a
consistent.
third thumb,
Uh-huh.
like
Wait
I
until
think I
you're
should be old
26.
enough. Yeah. Wait until I'm 26 for my third thumb.
Um, so I mean, I guess that begs the question that like should just age of adulthood be pushed to 26 if you're thinking your brain isn't you're not grown enough to consent or conceptualize these things yet? Should that just be generalized to all fields of life?
Well, I think that the driving age of 16 is fine. I think the smoking age, tobacco of 18 is fine. What alcohol's 18 where you're from, right?
Where I'm from in Toronto, it's 19 though. In
19.
Winnipeg,
Okay.
it's 18.
Yeah, oh yeah, Winnipeg. It's 21 where I am. I mean, why are certain drugs legal and certain drugs illegal, and who decides the line, and is that a wise decision? So
I
should
mean,
MDMA and mushrooms and acid be illegal? Those are body modification. Those are mind alternating drugs. So that's a form of
mhm.
transhumanism too. I just think that there needs to be more self awareness of oneself, and then certain avenues of self-expression are permanent, and some are more dangerous than others. And so the more dangerous, the more permanent, the more care needs to be taken with pursuing those.
And so the concern that like, well, the few trans people that are then eligible for this at 26 are going to be too far gone in their masculinizing puberty. And so they won't
Yeah,
ever actually be able to fully pass as a trans woman. So you're being bigoted for your stance that
yeah,
you're creating a society
that's
where they
that's a
can't
good question.
pass.
Well, why can't society adjust to accepting feminine males?
I think it can.
Yeah.
But it's I think it's more I think I don't even know if it's a question about society being able to adjust. I think it's about the person themselves not being happy with the way that they look. And this notion of, oh, if only I was able to go on puberty blockers and start HRT when I was 14, 16, then I would be so much happier in my skin. And so it's not up to you to refuse this.
That's true. Yeah. I just, so, I mean, so I'm not in charge and I'm not going to do that. But, my question back to you is that why is your look so important to you? Are you pursuing the deep human life through changing your looks? I mean, it's one thing to maintain your looks. To what degree are your looks important to you? And to what degree is that pathological?
Yeah, I guess this goes back to the passing question of, well, my looks are important to me because this is influencing how other people perceive and treat me and how I perceive myself.
It's important, but how important should it be? What does that say about a culture that adulates that? Is that not shallowness? Is there not, are there not mythological warnings about narcissists?
Yeah, maybe. But some degree of narcissism is good too. You want to care about your appearance a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Aesthetics are valuable.
I did shave. I do have, I don't know what I want my hair to do, but it's doing what it is. And I hope it presents okay. But I really do take care with my voice, my presentation of the audio. So that's where
I see. That's where all of your focus lies.
My production values, rest.
Nice. Is it bad to encourage other methods of alleviating dysphoria first before medicalization? Did
you say, is it bad or is it better?
Is it bad?
Is it bad to
encourage other methods of alleviating dysphoria? I mean, I can assume where your answer is going to go here, but this is just how I've been asking everyone.
Well, that's the whole like conversion therapy pea and cup game that they played, right? Like, oh, conversion therapy is bad, so don't ever ask a trans-identified youth if they have been sexually assaulted and want to flee their body because how horrible it makes them feel and makes them remind them of a persistent trauma that they haven't gotten over. And let's not look at the trauma, let's look at the gender and affirm it. I think that's terrible disservice to not understand or not to facilitate self-understanding, to just provide modification, external modification, instead of deep internal work.
That being said, what are your thoughts on puberty blockers?
Puberty blockers. There's one thing that I do want to say. People say, puberty blockers are Lupron. It's used for other things. It's used for men with prostate cancer, and it's used for castrating sexual offenders. And some people say that as though in and of itself, like that a medicine is used for another purpose that makes the medicine, that associates the medicine only with that purpose. Different substances are used in different ways. So I don't think that that's like the gotcha statement that people use it for, but it has been used, or I think it was developed for one purpose, and then off-label, I think is the term. It was used to help girls with early onset puberty, and there are certain medical reasons or developmental reasons why you'd want to delay puberty, not just psychological, but to allow the system, other parts of the system, to catch up in growth, and also also psychologically to let yourself grow up. But if you stop a kid at 12, if you give them puberty blockers at 12, and I just did an interview with James Linehan, who I'll connect you. He's a good reference point for this. He is intersex. His pituitary gland did not produce the hormone that he needed to follow the developmental male path. So at 16, he was taken aside by a nurse practitioner or somebody he goes to the doctor for something, and this nurse or this doctor in residency like asks him to drop his drawers, and turns out he's got like underdeveloped genitalia, right? Like his body didn't start puberty. So he's 16, his body is still like, his legs are long, but his torso, like he's just maldeveloped. But also his mind. He didn't understand anything about sex. He didn't understand all the different games that men and women play with each other and amongst themselves. He just kept on hanging out with 12-year-olds. Like he was stunted at that age. So, we look at, and there's different other arguments about why we would not use puberty blockers. But puberty is not a disease. It's a very necessary stage in development. It's where your brain goes through a massive amount of development. It's where and there's other reasons too, like your bones, like your entire system. It's an entire system. And to pause it on one thing, to give a child a chance to adapt, the child doesn't have a chance to adapt. They're still stuck in a stage where they're not ready to even understand cognitively what gender is, what sex is, and why they are dysphoric in one way or another. And to what degree is that cultural? To what degree is that family dynamic? To what degree that's somehow ingrained, like a true transness? We don't know, but to stop puberty, to watchfully wait, to socially transition, and then to puberty block, it inevitably, like 9 times out of 10, or like it incredibly leads to transition. Like it really leads to transition. So it's not like an either or thing. It's like this and. So you're already putting on a kid a path of transition. We also know that gender dysphoria is usually solved by puberty. In cases where it's not solved by puberty, it's solved by and insofar as it is solved by puberty, it tends to be the case that the child is homosexual in one way, in either one way or the other, or they're just an effeminate or masculine man or woman. Mm-hmm. It's very rare. Like so we're stopping. So if puberty itself solves gender dysphoria, blocking puberty is just taking the reins from nature, and it's just not a good thing. Plus, the child can't consent to that. Plus, we don't really know the long-term effects, but we do know that they can't be good because the body is much, much more complex than this endocrine system that we don't even understand. Like even the top scientists, it's too complex. We don't even really understand it. So it's a primitive. It's genitals, or it's genital mutilation of some sort, and it's not serving anything other than a cultural phenomena. And that cultural phenomena is an inch deep. It's not like some deep spiritual phenomena where we're culling like this class of eunuchs that are going to like be our prophets, right? Like which is kind of crazy, but at least that has some like cultural belief into it. It's just like this concept of the trans kid, which came out of nowhere, is not provable, and causes people to medically castrate and sterilize an entire generation for the sake of this idea that has no substance to it other than like, this is like the holy grail of human rights, is the trans kid, right? We're saving the kid from puberty. We're saving the kid from maturation. We're saving the kid. It's Peter Pan syndrome. We're saving the kid from actually having to develop in the path that they were designed to develop in. So it's incredibly hubristic, and it's shallow, and it's very dangerous, and it's a shame. That I hope people will be held accountable to, either with just a tinge of guilt. But barring that, there's other ways to stop it from happening. But no, I don't think puberty blockers should be used to help kids with a bad case of the I don't want to be me's.
Mm-hmm. Could you see a future where queer spaces, as kind of like in something like sports or competitions or like a gym locker changing room, something like that, you could have a third space that's just for queer people, like a catch-all bucket, a co-ed sort of situation to account for all of these exceptional people?
Given infinite resources, yes, we can have individual rooms. There's this gender neutral bathroom in Seattle airport, and me and Leslie went into it on our flight, and it's just like basically it's a bunch of individual stalls.
We have that
and
also
then
in
like
Canada.
A communal sink. And Leslie didn't like that at all. And then I thought that was weird. It's like, if a man goes in and takes a shit, then a woman's going to have to go in there and and it wasn't well ventilated either. You know, it's just like, there's something that it's just, and this is just me and my gendered positivity and like my bias for gender. There's something disrespectful to women to subject them to the bowel movements and urinary habits of men. Like, I think that men and women, they're different in that way, and women should be respected and given their own space, and men can deal with their space in the way that they want to deal with it, which tends to be a lot more efficient. So yeah, I don't want to be backed up in a women's line because the women need to sit down and powder their nose and yada, 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 yada. But like, there's an actual aspect of respect. And then there's also a cultural, it's an image of a cultural value. Do we think that there are differences here? And are these differences valuable? And I think that there are differences and they are valuable beyond just the biological make. I think that women need to be respected and men need to be respected too. That's why, when I get in trouble with certain feminists at certain times, and when I point out that feminism led to a lot of this stuff, the deconstruction of male-only spaces led to the deconstruction of female-only spaces, or it preceded it, at least. Like the destruction of the Boy Scouts as Boy Scouts, right? Or like men's clubs, because men were making all these deals, women wanted in on the deals, and so those men's clubs were kind of disrupted and dismantled for the sake of feminism, women who wanted in on that action, but it necessarily changed. It was disrespectful to men, even if men were being disrespectful with those institutions. So men could be more respectful with those institutions of just male-only spaces and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a hard one, but there's a lot there.
Oh, that's the interesting point. It's like emphasizing where your societal priorities lie.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to the final little section of questions, which is the most to do with like kind of the own ideas I've been spinning as I've been doing research for this, that I'm kind of wanting to think how might it have value in the Wonderland analysis of this topic. The first thing being, we kind of were talking about this at the top, like I feel like there's a through line between what we like the general catch-all, like LGBTQ plus queer category and other sorts of sexual paraphilias. That's always kind of maybe a contentious question of like, how much should these things be squashed together versus being distinct, because one's more about kink and one isn't. But to me, it seems like there's this through line of like, all of these are strong identity aspects that are rooted in sex on some level of analysis. It's either about your own sexual role or the target of your sexual attraction or your orientation or the nature of the sexual attraction that you want to participate in. But in all of those instances, the sex is playing this really primary motive for identity and action. And that to me seems like maybe it's a fruitful line of thinking, especially then speaking with Phil Illy the other day and his whole argument that like, well, you can actually start making a lot of sense of a lot of like transracial or furry, like other sorts of dysphoric trans identities that currently aren't accepted in the discourse, because it's like, oh, well, that's watering down. Like there's something sacred about gender that isn't the same about saying you're transracial. But Phil kind of points out like actually the motives could be more similar than we're being led to believe when it comes to this sort of like autoerotic target misallocation issues and stuff. So I guess my curiosity for you is like, in all the conversations you've had, would you say that there is a sexual motive in whatever way you want to break that open that's causing people to transition, detransition, etc.?
I'm going to broaden the question. Human beings are biological creatures. We're mammals, and we're animals. We're made out of stuff. We have hungers. We're hydraulic in a sense. We have desires and satiations, and we go through these processes, and we just kind of ride this machine or like this organism through our lives, this body that we have. We're also meaning makers, and we also are consciousnesses. There's a human being in all of these Homo sapiens, from my point of view, and that human being needs attention and wants to give attention, and that human being, on top of like sexual functions, digestive functions, health functions, wants to love and be loved. Sex has consequences. Chiefly, the chief consequence of sex being reproduction, and reproduction is tied with creating a new human being, and the human beings are special. Human beings are kind of divine, and they need attention, they need love, and so the sex that forms a human being, the better the sex, the better the human. I don't know, but I want to think so. If a man and woman come together and through loving each other and enjoying each other, they produce a baby, that baby's born under a good sign. If a man and a woman somehow have they're working out something else, or they're not really loving each other through the sex act. I'm not saying that child is illegitimate, but it's just not that child isn't born under a blessing. That human being wasn't brought into the world through an act of love. It was brought through the world with an act of power or something else, or rape or something like that. And the child is blameless in that, but it's disrespectful to the child to not put aside or to make sex about something greater than my own desires, because it leads to somebody else. So there's the sexual aspect of just an urge. One is horny. One is, especially as you're younger and male, you tend to be like just really, you just need to exhaust this pressure. And there are stimuli that you can use to exhaust that pressure. You can have these relationships, maybe with women where there wasn't a lot of meaning in that relationship, but you're expressing yourself in a way. But I think that that's disrespectful to the woman. It's disrespectful to yourself if you rely on pornography to exhaust that pressure, because you're forestalling, or you're short-circuiting something that's meant to or can be used for connection. So I guess it all goes back to sex can be something that's meaningless or simply enjoyable, but it can also be so much more. And I think that people consciously or subconsciously tend to err on it meaning more than less, tend to interact with each other sexually in a meaning container too. And so if sex is to be meaningful, then it needs to have some sort of transcendent value to it. That transcendent value, I think, is best expressed through the words of connection, intimacy, and then also with reproduction included in that. And if sex has the value of connection and intimacy, then gender identity isn't just about me serving myself. My paraphilias are breaking my connection to connect with other people, breaking my ability to connect with other people. I can't connect with my wife. I can only connect to the pantyhose that she's wearing. Like, there's something broken there. And our culture doesn't like to assign or to think about the brokenness, but it's just true. It's not ideal, and it's okay to have ideals. And I don't achieve my ideals. I am a sinner too, if you want to go the Christian route. But to get rid of the concept of failure or sin or brokenness, just to alleviate some discomfort I have with shame, is to spiral out of control. We need a North Star for sex and gender. That North Star should be connection and children. And if sex is meant for connection, then gender too is meant for connection. And then it all starts to make sense. And then we can start to have productive conversations about gender stereotypes, not just dismantling, but what do we want a man to act like? What do we want a woman to act like? How can a man act in such a way that a woman feels safe around him, that a woman respects him? How can a woman act in such a way where she's respected and adored and adulated beyond just desired by a man? Those are behavioral concepts that we have for centuries, for millennia, passed down from elders to children. And we've tried to escape from that so that everybody can be free to be themselves, but we're not content with that. And it's leading to a lot of wasted energy and a lot of people not getting closer to being someone who's close to someone else, right? Like there's a lot of people who are getting lost in themselves, and sex is, and I think that because sex has been unmoored from that ideal, that's the downstream effect. I can't remember your question. I hope I made a good.
It would, I mean, at this point, they're not really questions. It's more so me just feeding you the amorphous
Oh,
line of
yeah,
thinking, and
okay.
then you pick it
Yeah.
up. So anywhere you take it is great. There's no right or wrong answer.
Right. Okay.
Okay, the next thing is, as I've been looking at this, I've kind of intuited that people like I don't love the Blanchardian trans dichotomy because I think the way of framing things as like this autoerotic target misallocation is a little bit in the weeds, and it's not something. It's something that maybe a few people will recognize and identify with, and it can be beneficial for them. But there's also a lot of people that it like is supposed to capture, but they would not feel represented by that descriptor of their existence. And so in that way, it seems like maybe not the most helpful classification system if half the people you're trying to like wrangle into it are insistent that they don't belong there. But I think what maybe is a more fruitful way of looking at that dichotomy that he came to terms with is that there's definitely a spectrum in terms of, I guess I view there as being a correlation between your sexual orientation and the degree to which you have some innate masculinity or femininity. And so if you're a gay guy who's extremely gay, or a gay woman who's like extremely like butch in how her essence is, then if you couple that with some dysphoria for whatever reason, it's really easy to then develop a trans identity. And on the inverse side of that, it seems like the more dysphoric you are, the more you have a sense of gender identity in any measure. But basically, like, I guess I'm trying to think. I'm thinking maybe it helps to think about trans people just on a spectrum from being like, is your innate biology, are you a homosexual, transsexual? In which case you probably have more of this baseline femininity if you're talking about like a male to female. On the other side of the spectrum, you could be like a heterosexual transsexual, in which case maybe your motives are slightly more autogynephilic in baseline, but like maybe not everyone loves that sort of language or connotations. But then there's also a healthy group that sit in the center where they're bisexual, and maybe they've got some of this autogynephilia and some of this more innate degree of femininity that they're trying to represent. And maybe that's a helpful way of kind of thinking about different trans identities that also correlates to other aspects of their lived experience or behaviors.
You're talking mostly about males here.
I think that it parses to, I'm just using that because that seems to be the more default term, but I think it works for the other direction too, because autoandrophilia is also just as prevalent according to Phil. So I guess I'm just wondering, how does that sound to you?
Well, I mean, I've spoken with Blanchard a couple of times, and he would he would have a way of reframing that, and I could kind of
with the meta attraction and stuff.
He would want more data on it. So if you have a theory, then you can test it with data. His typology of the heterosexual transsexual and the autogynephilic transsexual is based on however many thousands of interviews or hundreds of interviews that he did. So that's just, it's salient in a way, because, well, I mean, in terms of a gay boy, they're already kind of feminine. So leaning into that probably helps them with attracting the kind of attention or the kind of man that they want. In terms of the more stereotypical autogynephile midlife crisis guy, instead of getting a car, he becomes this car. And instead of a car and a bimbo, he becomes the car and the bimbo, in a way. There is the heterosexual transsexual has a sexual, he's in a sexual conversation with himself. He's in a conversations with his own femininity. Jung would talk about the anima, right? He's
Yeah.
dealing with his anima. He's going through a phase of dealing with his anima. And I think that physical transition is the materialization of a spiritual process. Now,
Yeah.
some materializations are okay. But if it's treated as an end in itself, there's no end to it because there's no final transition. Like there's literally no, you do your brow, you do your nose, you do your clavicles, you do your genitals, you do your chest, you do this and that and this and that and your hair, blah, blah, blah. So there's no end to it unless it means something beyond the marker. The marker in itself just becomes a dead end for one's spiritual development. So the sexual compulsion, is I don't have like being a man and understanding my own sexuality. It's like sexuality is just like this urge. There's this urge, there's something behind the urge and there's something in front of the urge and it's a circuit and it's connected and then it fizzles out. If I were to start to put my desire for females into myself, it would be very dangerous for me. It would make me more and more self-aware, more and more self-concerned, and I would fail in my role as a man of serving those around me. I would take the energy that should, and not to say that I don't waste my time on board games and video games. I spend my energy in selfish ways all the time. But I'm trying to, over the course of my life, I'm trying to reform my sexuality so my sexuality serves something beyond myself. And in the periods of my life where my sexuality only served myself, I was not a full human being. I was a partial human being. I wasn't fulfilling myself. I wasn't achieving fulfillment. I wasn't loved and loving. I was shutting myself off in a certain way, and I think that was not good for me.
I feel like people might.
So there's the description and then there's the value, and I don't know how to do one without the other.
What's the description of value?
Well, when you were talking about the classifications of transsexuals and stuff, I can only think in terms of the value. Like, what do these people want, and are they getting what they want? So the classifying what kind of transsexual is one conversation, but I turned the conversation to what do they really desire? What do they really desire?
My impression is that like people that have this autosexual orientation, they're going to be more to derive more spiritual personal satisfaction from having this turned inwards sexual relationship than you might, where it's like because it's a fundamentally different orientation in the same way that being a gay man, like if you're saying, well, if by choosing to sleep with men instead of women, you're kind of refusing this broader spiritual call of like, you're not actually being in service to your masculinity. It's like, okay, well, you could say that, but it's not going to be very persuasive for the gay guy. That's like, well, I'm just attracted to men, so I want to do this because it's going to fulfill me on a personal level.
Yeah. Well, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. There's a certain values that I hold and that I'm expressing. And they make sense and they align with certain people's values and they don't make sense to others. And, those are all wonderful conversations that I'm absolutely open to having.
Yeah. So I guess my central curiosity is like having like, instead of just the black and white typology buckets, just adding a gray bucket in the middle that it kind of says maybe you've got a foot in both of these, which will then also speak to the way you're saying the inverse side of like, well, what do you actually want? How much are you going to derive benefit from various treatments, etc. It maybe is more helpful letting wiggle room for the bisexual, transsexual to also have maybe a more unique, a distinct set of instances and experiences that's distinct from the previous two because it's this amalgam. And by brute forcing the two categories.
If somebody's relying on somebody else to describe their experience, then they're a weak person and need to grow the fuck up, right? I'm sorry to say that, but like you can't to give somebody wiggle room, like they'll take wiggle room if they want to or not, but if they rely on some sort of classification other than justification for very expensive medical care, that's the question. If they don't need really expensive they don't need justifications for very expensive medical care, then identify however you want. What does it really serve? Is your identity serving humanity or not? Like, that's the question, right? So if you want to have this identity that's a bisexual, transsexual, like okay, but who cares? I guess the insurance company cares, or doctors care because of curiosity. The typology, what does the typology even serve, right? So if we adulate typology, I think you're putting the cart before the horse.
I guess my impression is that if you have a strong sense, just in the same way that I'm quite critical of like mental illness, mental health, mental illness culture on a broad level of analysis, but I also
Yeah.
do recognize that it can be helpful for someone to have the tool of like, once you have a BPD or an ADHD, whatever diagnosis, then you can be
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm a person that's like this. And that can give you some semblance, some narrative, some map to kind of then chart your path forward,
Yeah. Yeah.
which will prove to be more or less helpful depending on the person. But
Yeah.
I guess that's my impression is
And
like
so,
you're not using it to anchor yourself, but it can be
yeah.
a guidance.
Well, and that's why I keep on the whole conversation. I'm trying to ask, well, what does it even mean? What does it even mean? What does this serve? What's the purpose of
Mm-hmm.
this thing? If the purpose of thing is to alleviate distress or to access medical care or to make yourself feel important or to avoid certain traumas, to deal with certain, like, what does it all mean? And that's a case by case basis. So, but the typology doesn't serve anything other than trying to describe a phenomena. If the typology doesn't suit the phenomena, then the typology is inaccurate or not useful. But I don't know why Blanchard thinks it's useful, but he thinks that this is useful, and the insurance companies thinks it's useful too. But the activists don't think it's useful, so they want to decimate it. But then what do they have to anchor any of this stuff on? Now we're seeing the results. I'm sorry, Jane. This is a fascinating conversation, but I have to go. But
No,
this
I understand.
truly,
That
I
was the end of the
truly do not.
questions.
Okay, I truly don't want to leave because we're having such a great conversation.
Aw.
So.
No, I appreciate you giving me the time. This has definitely been productive for me. So,
So I'm just going to stop the recording, get off the call, but we'll
sure thing.
continue conversation and you'll let me know what you want me to do with the recording.
Sure thing.
All right. Have a good day.
Okay. Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye.